We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome to the podcast they call Pick a Disc. I'm your host Matt Latham, and this is the podcast where someone picks a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to. And today I'm glad to welcome Sofia Loporcaro from the Before the Chorus podcast to talk about the National Sleep Well Beast from 2017. As usual, the usual thing happens where we talk about the songs and the lyrics and the music, etc, etc, etc. But we have some nice deviations where we talk about the meanings of songs as well, and it's a really nice kind of like conversation that we have in the middle of all this. So I'm looking forward for hearing that bit. So I really enjoyed having that conversation anyway. So yeah, before I hit play on the interview with Sofia, I just want to let you know that, of course, as always, you can subscribe and follow the podcast, etc, etc, etc. You can follow us on Twitter, you can follow us on Instagram, you can follow us on Facebook. There's also a Discord server if you want to join on that as well, and there's also the Patreon for We Made This, which is for the whole network, so you don't get anything Pick a Disc related, but you can support the show or the whole kind of network that we're on by going on to patreon.com/We Made This. And I don't know if I've mentioned this, I've probably mentioned this already, but I'm now kind of co-show running and co-hosting a podcast called No Book Club, which follows the Yellow Jackets TV show that's been airing on Showtime. We're currently going at the time of airing. I think we're about a couple of episodes into series 1, and I've hosted a few, and even better, there's a couple that I'm not on. So if that puts you off a podcast, me being host of it, then yeah, that will feed that demographic for anyone who likes this but hates me. But anyway, saying that, I'm rabbiting on a bit more, so do follow all the stuff on socials, rate and review us on all the places that allow you to rate and review, and then just sit back, relax, and recline in your chairs whilst I go and hit play on the interview where I speak to Sofia. I feel like there's always a small world, because I think in the initial chats when we started arranging this, he goes, "Oh yeah, I know Helen Deakin." I was like, "Wait, what?" Yeah, and I sent her a message saying I just had someone who said they know you, and I went, "Who?" And before I even mentioned you, he's like, "Oh my God, Sophia." It's like a really small. The world's getting ever smaller, I think.
Oh yeah, but also keep in mind that I lived in London for 3.5 years, and I worked in radio. I went to the University of Westminster, so I know a lot of people in radio and in the local music scene. I know that Helen is now, if I remember correctly, in Birmingham, but we went to uni together, so we knew each other, and we would kind of just randomly have chats on Instagram. She's lovely.
Yeah, it's it's just kind of just weird that it's like, the world's starting. I think ever since I started doing a podcast, the world just seems to be getting smaller and smaller.
It makes sense. I mean, when I used to be involved in the music scene in London, half the time I'd be, chatting with one artist and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I've toured with this person, or I'm friends with this person, or I grew up with this person." I know, one of my first guests on my podcast, and I also, even before that on my university radio show, is a group called Gengar, who are phenomenal. And they're mates with Alt J, Bombay Bicycle Club, Marika Hackman, Slaves, and then also by extension, Jack from Bombay Bicycle Club is mates with Flight, who I'm also friends with. It's just the whole, especially the London music scene, the UK in general, but particularly the London music scene. Me and my friends used to joke that it was borderline incestuous. It is ridiculous how many people are just so interconnected. And then it's the same with the radio industry there.
Yeah, I've been learning that as I've been going on. But yeah, so Sofia from the Before the Chorus podcast is the guest for this fortnight, and she's here to pick a album that she's nominated. So, without beating around the bush, can you tell the audience, please, the disc that you've picked for today?
Mm-hmm. I have chosen Sleep Well Beast by The National.
Yeah, and why have you picked Sleep Well Beast?
Well, first of all, I would guess, or I'd be pretty comfortable wagering that the kind of most well-known and probably most beloved record from the National is the one that comes before it, which is Trouble Will Find Me. But I have a really strong affinity with Sleep Well Beast. It is a gorgeous record. I think some of the songwriting on it is just Matt Berninger at his finest, and it also just shows the really beautiful marriage between his abilities as a songwriter, his abilities as sort of like very raspy, salt of the earth vocalist, placed with like the Dessner brothers and the sort of larger group of the Nationals, really expansive, I guess ephemeral, if you will, instrumentation. And also, I remember talking to a friend about this record once, and I think that he had told me that he wasn't as much of a fan of it because there's an almost like electronic tinge to some of the songs, particularly in comparison to some of the other records that they've put out. But that was actually my favorite part of it, because to me, Sleep Well Beast is proof that if you use a combination of more like electronic and digital sounds with more organic sounds, if you use them sort of in the service of building a feeling, they can feel very human and very warm. And this record does that stunningly well. So it's one of my favorite records that's ever been put out. It's my favorite record from the National, so I wanted to choose it.
So were you a fan of the National before this album came out then?
I was, yeah.
How did you discover or learn of the National? Like your origin story? What was your origin story? Can you remember?
Let's see here. I'm not 100% sure, but I probably first heard them when I was working in retail as a teenager. This would have been around like, I think 2013. I was working at a clothing store called Garage in Canada. We say garage, not garage. It's basically, again, I was 17 years old. It was like the store that all the girls in Canada went to get their stuff as teenagers and like preteens. Mm-hmm. And around 2013, this is like the time that like AM by Arctic Monkeys was really big. I think it was pretty close to, when Modern Vampires of the City by Vampire Weekend was big. There was that sort of like era. It was like the Tumblr indie era. Tumblr and like American Apparel indie era.
Tumblr indie, yeah.
There you go. And the store that I was working at was definitely trying to pivot and pander more to that than they used to. So all of a sudden our playlist got updated with, that with, oh God. See, I tried to make myself like a really like nice cup of like turmeric latte. I know that makes me sound like a ridiculous LA person, but like it was going to be like my nice like little wake up drink because it's early. It's not early, but I didn't sleep well. So my brain is just going to sort of vomit things out, and I'm going to try and sound as coherent as I possibly can. But dang it, why am I forgetting? The Black Keys, thank you. Anyway, so we had like all of this indie. Some of it was severely overplayed. It definitely ruined some of it for me, but I'm pretty sure, what was the song? How am I supposed to know? Sea of Love by The National. And also, actually, you know what? It might have been there, or we had a rock station in Montreal where I grew up that used to play that song a lot. And I remember falling in love with that one when I was younger, and I used to have a YouTube channel where I'd put up covers. That was the first one I put up. So that's how I initially discovered The National. And I think Sleep Well Beast for me several years later when I was living in London and I was a young adult, that was the album that sort of cemented them as one of my favorite artists. So yeah, that was a long and very tangential story, but yes, that is how I initially found The National.
No, it's not. No, it's nice. And the first album of theirs that you said you liked or you listened to was that the one you was just on about?
Trouble Will Find Me. Yeah, again, that one's very, very big. Like Sea of Love's on that one, Graceless, I Need My Girl. There's a lot of songs that of that sort of era of indie are iconic. Like if you go through any playlist from the time that record was released, there will definitely be some of those songs on it.
who are the National? So the National are an American rock band of Cincinnati, Ohio natives formed in Brooklyn, New York City in 1999. The band consists of Matt Berninger, Aaron Dessner, Bryce Dessner, Scott Devendorf, I'm going to say Devendorf, and Brian Devendorf. Karen Besser is not a band member, but has written lyrics for the band alongside her husband, Berninger, since his 2007 album Boxer, a fact that is going to be very, very important in the conversation later. So, Sleep Well Beast was released on the 8th of September 2017 by 4AD. It also won the Grammy Award for Best Alternative Music Album in 2018. And before we talk about the album itself, my history with the National, say this is probably the first time I've actually listened to anything by the National. I probably might have listened to something by osmosis, or perhaps I might, but I probably never really, my brain never registered that I'm listening to the National, so I've never kind of either seeked them out or listened to them really. I've got a sneak suspicion that they probably would be a band that was played on a load of mid-set playlist when I've been at gigs, so on the PA. So I've got a sneaky suspicion that's quite a few, particularly I think quite a few kind of folky bands that I saw like several years ago probably would have had them on the playlist. But my only other experience of Matt Berninger and Aaron Dessner is one. Matt Berninger appeared on the third Churches album. I think he had a guest appearance on I can't remember the name of the song, but he was on Love Is Dead. And Aaron Dessner I know of since Leah from She Will Rock You basically turned me into a Swiftie. So
yeah, no, Aaron's been doing okay for himself over the last few years. He's also got a group with Justin Vernon, so Bon Iver, called Big Red Machine, who put out a stunning record last year, which features, Taylor's on that record. There's a song on it called Phoenix, which features Robin Pecknold of Fleet Foxes and Anais Mitchell. I kind of jokingly call it the holy trinity of indie because you have the National, Fleet Foxes, and Bon Iver all on the same song.
Okay. Fleet Foxes and Bon Iver, again, bands that I've not really listened to that much. That said, though, I think there's a Bon Iver album that a potential guest has pretty much claimed months and months ago and says no one is touching that. I want to speak. I think 22 million. I think it is.
Yeah, I was gonna guess that. It's usually either that one or the first record, which is called Forever Ago. On a slight tangent for that, Bon Iver is, so my day job, I work as a social media manager for a company called Planetary Group, and they do radio promotion, and they worked that first Bon Iver record, Forever. And so I was doing a post about it, and I basically explained Bon Iver is the patron saint of modern indie folk, because if you ask pretty much any sort of left field indie artist nowadays who their influences are, like 9 times out of 10 they'll say Bon Iver, to the point that it's almost ridiculous. But to his credit, Justin Vernon is a phenomenal artist. And then 22 Million, while admittedly not always my favorite record, it has some really beautiful moments, and it's where he really went from being this kind of more bona fide folk artist to just playing with all these like glitches and like screwed up tape recorders, and like it's a very like experimental album. So that'll be an interesting one. I don't know who this guest is and who's going to talk about it, but I think that they'll if there's someone who loves that album, they're gonna love talking about it.
Yeah, considering who the guest is, they will. So Sleep Well Beast, the album itself, I feel, so I'm trying reading into the album. The album, it seems to be about like relationships or the breakdown of relationships. If I understand what I've read correctly. And the big point with that, and what I've read about it, is saying that because a lot of the songs are written by Berninger and his wife, that they seem to be writing about failing relationships, whereas they've in interviews and stuff they say that they're quite strong and it's not a reflection of their relationship, which immediately has a kind of interesting angle on it when you get to it.
You know, it's funny. So again, admittedly, I don't know all the lyrics incredibly well on that record, but I never read it so much as an album of things breaking down. Then again, if you think about it, there's definitely a lot of moments where there's that sense. It's very melancholic, as is a lot of the Nationals music, but the moments that always stuck out to me on that record were these moments of tenderness and really profound humanity. Like the very first record, or not very first record, the very first song, Nobody Else Will Be There. It's much more like, it's not so much of a relationship falling apart. It's kind of, you know, two people wanting to be together, and there's just this line, "Will you meet me in the stairwell for a glass of gin?" And that stuck out to me, and this is where you'll get kind of one of my more like, this is why I love the National, and this is why I love this record. Matt Berninger as an artist is so good at writing about very specific moments. Like, rather than writing like general feelings, a lot of the time he'll often sort of place you in a moment, and in and of itself, that's enough. And like the instrumentation on that song too, just that very simple piano melody that's going through it, creates this sense of like intimacy. Like, you feel like you're being invited into a space where it's just two people alone having a quiet moment. So yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the kind of more relationship falling apart side of things, because I find there's so much tenderness on this record.
Okay. I think there's a quote that I've got from, I think, Berninger himself, I think, where he says that, I'll read the quote. Anyway, it says, It is about marriage. It's about marriages falling apart. I'm happily married, but it's hard. Marriage is hard, and my wife and I are writing lyrics together about our own struggles, and it's difficult to write, but it's saving my marriage. Not saving my marriage is healthy, but it's good for everything, and it's going to be a strange record, and I'm crazy about it. Which is, so, yeah, and I think when you're talking about the kind of like singular moments and stuff, I think in the past on different episodes, I've talked about how I'm pretty much a fan of albums that either kind of help build a world around them. So like you have songs, lyrics, and you can kind of start filling in gaps in the story yourself because of the writing that's there. So you can kind of build the situation that the songs are about. And I think particularly there, and with some of the songs on here as well, I think they do that, but it is also, as you said, very, I don't want to say claustrophobic, but very kind of, I'm not sure what's the word I'm searching for.
I'm not sure, but it kind of weirdly sounds close to what I'm saying, because
Yeah.
I would say zoomed in is the word that I would use for.
Yeah, or very small
Like,
moments in time that are kind of like, yeah, but like, whereas you probably got like slightly expanded themes in certain, like some songwriters will expand on themes and stuff. This one seems to be about specific moments, and yeah, and like tiny, like kind of fleeting moments that are kind of almost relatable in how small interactions are and stuff.
yeah, again, that's exactly why I love this album so much. It's deeply intimate, and again, you know, it's funny, like I definitely in some ways, you know, particularly because I'm someone who spends my time like analyzing the hell out of albums, whereas with this record, I know it very well, but I've really only like dove into certain songs. Just now I was having this like kind of moment of like, am I not doing it justice? Because I'm not like analyzing every single word, but admittedly for this album, I just, as it is, I kind of just have like an intimate relationship with it. And I don't know if it's that I necessarily just want to, purely for selfish reasons, like allow myself to feel it as I feel it. But I don't know. It's just, there's just something about the way that it makes me react to it. And yeah, and speaking of what you were saying about these kind of zoomed in moments, if you look at the album art, for example, it's this like darkened house with a singular window, and you can peer into the window seeing like a woman standing at it. And so it very much seems to symbolize this sort of peering into these intimate moments of domestic life. So
yeah. I think, just any long-term listeners are probably going to start cheering because I'm going to be speaking about the artwork because I always forget to talk about the artwork. But no, you go, there's a good point there where it looks like the artwork feels like you're walking past a house. Because I'm just staring at the monitor at the moment. You're kind of walking past the house and you kind of like glance over and the lights, it's like dark and the lights are on and you can kind of see a scene unfolding in the house and stuff. And it's like a very... I'm not saying that I walk down the streets and just start peering into people's houses. I do not do that. But like occasionally you get glimpses of life or activity and you're just getting like a very small millisecond of somebody else's life that's happening in the world around you and stuff. And from what you're saying, that is kind of well reflected in the actual the artwork of the album, because it is pretty much looking into like a house from a distance and you're just seeing a very brief interaction of somebody else's life. So,
and yet in a sense, I mean, like, I think whenever any of us has, walked by a window where we see, and even if we don't, creepily stare longingly into a person's house, because maybe don't do that, but even if you just briefly glimpse and continue to walk, it's very normal to kind of, wonder what those people's lives are like. You've seen this brief kind of peer into another person's, intimate life. And this album, even though the artwork in some ways is suggesting like you're being partially invited in a lot of ways you're being like, this album's kind of answering that question that we ask ourselves, is like, this house, you're actually going to hear the stories and the lives and the domestic bliss and not so bliss that is hiding behind this window.
So, and in terms of the album itself, I mean, like, when I was going to it, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect, because my kind of knowledge of the National is very much non-existent. For some reason, there are two things that surprised me. I was expecting them to be slightly more rocky, so I was expecting perhaps not as much as the Black Keys, but perhaps halfway between what it is now and the Black Keys. I didn't expect it to be as you said, melancholic as it actually is. So I was quite surprised at how kind of introspective, and I don't want to say slow or quiet, because it's not quiet in places, but I was kind of surprised at how sedate it felt and how introspective. At some points there are parts of it that reminded me of a mixture between Death Cab for Cutie and the Postal Service. If Ben Gibbard got bored and started playing both his projects at the same time at places, but added more piano. And the other reference point that I had was Nick Cave. And the only Nick Cave album I've listened to is Murder Ballads, which is infamously the first ever album ever covered on any version of Pickadisc. But there's a very kind of deep, at times where I think Berninger goes into a very, very deep voice.
Oh yeah, well he's got that like low raspy voice.
And he's kind of
it's very Leonard Cohen-esque of that, like older Leonard Cohen, where he started to do his like talk singing and his voice was worn with age. But I think it works. And ironically, I mean, now I've become a very big fan of Big Red Machine, but the first Big Red Machine record I was kind of not as excited about. And I also, on Matt's side, I do enjoy his solo work, but not as much as I love the National. And I think it just proves to me how effective the marriage of the two kind of sides is, because you have these sort of like, again, some of the records do have a little more of that rocky feeling that you're thinking of. They always have some like restraint and some sort of like more like expansive like indie sounds, but this album definitely has a bit more restraint. But there's a beautiful contrast between, again, that sort of scratchy salt of the earth voice that Matt has with these big like expansive beautiful sounds coming from the band. There's just something about it that works so beautifully. It's like you're getting the kind of quiet, honest intimacy from Matt's voice, but for me, the music almost feels like it's like our inner emotions being like fully saturated. So it's like it just enhances the feeling of whatever Matt is saying. And again, it's just an insanely effective way of making music and making people feel and react.
How different is Berninger's solo stuff to this? Is it
not that different? It's just I find that the again, the instrumentation is just not as fleshed out. And then again, like if you listen to Aaron's stuff, it's more of like the kind of expansive soft sides, and it doesn't kind of get treated with the grit that that Matt brings to it. But to Aaron's credit, I think on his latest Big Red Machine record, he's really hit his stride with that sort of side of his sound, and it's a beautiful record. But yeah, I'm definitely still like a proper The National fan.
No, it's fine. So the only other thing I was going to say ask as well is that this is what album is this of theirs? The 7th album.
Yeah.
Is this quite indicative of their sound still, or or is this like a new direction for them, or is this kind of a lot like their previous albums? I mean, I've not gone back to the previous ones, but like for example, in previous episodes, you'll go back a couple of albums and the completely different genre. Is that the same with the National, or is that?
I wouldn't say so. I feel like the National. I mean, I haven't gone as far back as Boxer. Like, I'm very familiar with 3 of their records, which are High Violet, Trouble Will Find Me, and Sleep All Beast. There's actually one that's come out since Sleep All Beast, but I've been so just fixated on like Sleep All Beast really did it for me. I was kind of okay with the singles on this newer record, so I never visited it. But at least with these 3 records that I mentioned, it's more like the accents are different, but they're always a very recognizable band. Like, again, I'm sure if you go like way back into like their early records, I wouldn't be surprised if it leaned even more like rocky and stuff, you know, like especially being in the New York scene. They came up around the same time as the Strokes. I mean, they've become more like big in the last, I guess, maybe decade or so, but you know, they've been around that long. Yeah. But as far as the records that I'm familiar with, they're very much a recognizable band. And their growth is very much more in the details rather than in like big shifts in their sound.
Okay, yeah, I think actually saying that, I forgot that the 1999 and around Brooklyn stuff, and considering that it's been nearly 2 years since I spoke to Hannah about the Strokes album, I still have not started Meet Me in the Bathroom, which is the New York stuff.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I haven't read that book.
I've got it on my Kindle app, and I've had it for about 2 years, and I've still not started it. But I think Berninger is actually in.
They are in it, yeah. That I'm aware of.
Yeah, I really do need to finish it. I will get around to it at some point.
It's fine, don't worry.
Yeah.
I'm terrible about reading. Like, I have a book that from a few years ago that I tried finishing. I'm literally like 10 pages to the end, and I just stopped because I lost interest, which is ridiculous. Now, last year I read Crying in H Mart, which is Michelle Zauner, aka Japanese Breakfast's book, and I finished that in 2 weeks, and it kind of re-sparked my desire to read, because it was like, oh, I just finally found a book that's clicked for me. But right now, rather than being in a kick on music books, I just started reading The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, which is a political philosophical book from Renaissance Italy.
I think what's distracting me, I seem to take on books like I do TV shows, where like I have to watch the one all the way through, and I'm currently like that with this book. I bought this book on the Kindle app about almost nearly 2 years ago now, but it's a collection of 7 books in a series, and it's almost, and I quite like the idea of the mythology of it, but it's almost practically a young adult novel, so it's got a lot of really the whole like supernatural element's really fascinating, but there's also a lot of kind of relationship
cringe
stuff that are really kind of cringe stuff, and every so often I'll read a couple of pages and it's the supernatural like story arc stuff is fascinating, but you have to go through all this stuff, and at one point I will get to the end of that, and then I will have no idea what to read next because I've got a load of unfinished stuff. But Meet Me in the Bathroom is on that list.
I completely understand that. That's how I feel about the Marvel universe. Like I'm very much, which ironically is why, like, for someone who loves records so much, I don't sit down and listen to a record front to back all that often, because for me it's like an all-consuming thing. And I just do not have the mental energy for that, like, ever. Other than like when it's like, oh, it's for my podcast and I have a deadline for it. But in my spare time, like, one of my favorite records is To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar, and yet I haven't listened to it that much. But again, it's a record that asks you to sit down, shut up,
Yeah.
and listen to it front to back, you know? And like, so that, yeah, To Pimp a Butterfly as well as Good Kid, Mad City. They're hefty records, and it takes a lot of just commitment to sit down, because like you can't half-ass it. You can't. So I very much sympathize with that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, so so interesting you mentioned about your relationship with music and stuff. So so it's quite rare, or is it not often that you sit down and listen to a whole album? Is it like a case that you'll pick songs and put them into playlists, or is it just a case of picking songs and just listening to certain songs? Or
I mean, I'll definitely do that. Like, I have my playlist. I usually, from start to finish of each year, I compile a playlist of my favorite songs of the year. And again, I start it from the beginning of the year so that I don't forget anything. And I mean, I will listen to albums, but often I'll just kind of, be in the car and just kind of let myself skip through the songs that I'm not as into. Because again, for me, a lot of times an album is like, I need to sit down and listen to this whole thing. And I don't have an attention span anymore, because I live in today's day and age of quick attention spans. And also just, life is busy and my mental bandwidth is kind of run thin. But I will say one thing I do enjoy about my podcast is that it kind of forces me to do it from time to time. So I kind of get to reconnect to that feeling of sitting down, listening to a record front to back. And it's allowed me to definitely discover some really phenomenal records over the years, and again, reconnect with that side of myself.
Oh, okay. I just thought it was quite interesting to see how different people kind of interact or listen to stuff, so that's quite interesting to hear that. So, okay, so we're going to go through, moving on to the tracks now and talking about individual songs. We're not going to have time to go through a single one of them, but as usual, I'm going to let the guest dictate where we start. So, in terms of some of the songs on here, which jump out to you, as in, like, when you think of this album, which songs jump out and think, and like, you associate immediately?
Ooh, so definitely, again, the opening track, Nobody Else Would Be There. I think it really sets that tone of intimacy. I mean, we already spoke about it a bit before. It's that really soft, melancholic, minimalist piano melody that just sort of plays over and over again, and we're invited into these intimate moments of a relationship. So that's definitely the start for me. It really just pulls you in immediately. And I mean, there isn't really much more I can add about it. It's just like a masterclass on very zoomed in writing. And I'll often, when I'm talking to other artists and I find that they're writing in ways that are, about very like intimate moments and very like, again, very zoomed in moments, I'll often say it's a very Matt Berninger-esque way of writing. And they'll often agree with me. They'll be like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And then the next one, I think I definitely have to talk about the second song, The Day I Die, because it's such a like emotional kick into gear. Like, you immediately feel like you're running, because you have like an almost like breakbeat-esque drum on it, like a da 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 da, with this like huge like very like reverbed out guitar riff. And the first line of it is, I don't need you, I don't need you. So it's just like you go from this very soft, intimate, delicate moment to this burst of emotion. And the question in the chorus is, the day I die, where will we be? It's like, I haven't actually, ironically, even though I haven't sat down and listened to the lyrics that much of this one, I know it very well. What's that line in it? It's like, I used to put my head inside the speakers when you get too high and talk forever. It's like, I almost wonder, for considering that I haven't sat down and read it front to back, if it's like after all of the good, the bad, these annoyances of domestic life, maybe the bigger arguments, like, where are we? Are we going to still be together? Are we going to be in each other's lives? Like, it's such a like existential question, and sonically it's given just that like saturated emotional burst that it deserves. So yeah, that's another one for me.
The Genius annotation, I can't see the contributor's name, but I do quite like some of the annotations on Genius. It goes, despite what seems to be a straightforward geographical question, this is actually much deeper when looked at in context. Which
that makes me want to roll my eyes so far back into the back of my head. That is ridiculous. It's like, well, excuse my French if I'm not supposed to swear. You can beep this out, but no shit. Like, of course it's an existential question. Not where am I going to physically be, Cleveland? Like, it's like, no. This is such a, like, introspective, existential album. Like,
yeah.
That just sounds so, like, mansplaining. I'm sorry. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, but I think it goes on saying the rest of the song lyrics remember idiosyncratic moments in the relationships, and will they work it all out, the kinks and problems that cause grief over the years, and there's a great story or tragedy and only time will tell. There's kind of like, I quite like the storytelling that's happening there for that. I mean, initially, I think the sound of it as well, this was, when it first started, I was like, it was, okay, this is much more of the sound I was expecting when I was thinking of the National. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so in my head, this is what I was thinking that they were sounding like anyway. But I quite like the idea that they kind of talking about finality and the finality of life, and pretty much, okay, where they're kind of jumping ahead and saying, you know what, we're not living in the now, we're kind of, our heads are in the future. So are we going to be together and stuff? Whereas like, but you're together now. And there's an album that I love, and I'm hesitant to reveal it because it's one that I want to speak on a future Matt pick. And if I reveal what it is, I might tell you what it is in a second, and I'll edit it out. But the end of the opening song has a great line where, if you're given the option of dying painlessly at peace at 45 with a lover at your side after a full and healthy life, would this be something that would interest you, and would it interest you at all? And that song ends, and that kind of question's always lingered in my head, saying like, who would say yes? Who would say no? Who would say yes to that? So like, if you I mean, when that album came out, I was 20. I was able to know what age I was when the album came out. I think I was like 23, I think. And like that, I think and the band in question were the same age as me, and I think if they that, and now I'm 36, and the band are 35, 36, that question is saying like, okay, if you had that question, you got 10 years rather than 20. Would you consider that, or would you rather have an indeterminate amount of time, but not have the troubles,
the guarantee?
Yeah, yeah. And
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I truly don't.
Yeah, it's
a tough one.
Yeah, it's one of those questions I like. But that line jumped out to me, and is like, and the question in the day I die, he's kind of like saying that it doesn't have that kind of finality to it, like. It just like they've gone through. It seems like they're going through something there and then in order to ask that question in the first place. Whereas if it was the protagonists from that other song I mentioned, they'll never have be in that position to write or think of the song or of the moments that are happening in that National song. Mm-hmm. So.
Also, I'm pretty sure that Matt Berninger is probably around like in his late 40s now too. So technically, he's past that number. So he can't ask himself 50. That question anymore.
He's 50. I think.
Oh yeah, it's true.
Because I had a quick look and I was like, oh, how old are they? And they're a lot older than I expected. I was expecting them to be about a decade younger than they actually are. I was quite surprised.
Yeah, nope. So, dad rockers, man.
Yeah, and yeah,
literal dad rockers.
Particularly with the age, I think it was late 40s that was writing this. So there's a lot of post and midlife crisis happening already, so because there's particularly with the other songs as well, there's quite a lot of interesting aspects. When I realised how old the national band members were, the songs came slightly more interesting because I think, particularly with the kind of indie sound, and the time I grew up, I always automatically assume that they're either a couple of years older than me, particularly for a band that's been around this long. But then knowing they're about a decade and a half older than I am, it's like, okay, there's a lot more life experience in those stories and stuff.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that because I'm actually skipping quite far down the album, but the next song I want to talk about is I'll Still Destroy You, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. I often say, I am a 25-year-old, very much single woman with no children. And it is a song that is so beautifully written and so well written that I find myself very intimately understanding a middle-aged man with children. And I still remember being on a bus in Montreal, and the first time I was like, okay, I'm going to really force myself to listen to every detail of this song. It's one of the few times I've done that. And ever since then, it's been one of my favorite songs because what I'll Still Destroy You is about, and this I actually do know, is about the idea that as a parent, no matter how you try to raise your kids well, because they witness you going through life as an adult, they see you with all of your flaws, just simply, you're not always going to be a perfect parent. In some ways, you're still going to leave a mark on your children. So I'll Still Destroy You is no matter how much I try to, be a good parent, I'm still going to leave you flawed because I'm flawed. And it's such a, it's a sad sentiment, but it's such an understandable insecurity for a parent to have. And the whole song has this warm, nostalgic feeling. This is also the song when I talked about electronica being used really effectively to create feeling. There's so many little shimmery, bubbly sounds and weird pans and stuff. But that use of electronica is what brings up that sort of warm, sentimental, nostalgic feeling of the song. My favorite line from that song is "Put your heels against the wall. I swear you got a little bit taller since I last saw you. I'll still destroy you." That hurts when you listen to it, because I'm sure that also comes from being a parent who's a touring musician, also missing parts of your child's life being away. And yeah, there's just so many moments in that song that are so, again, it goes back to that idea of the zoomed in songwriting, but he knows how to pick out those moments really well, which ones he decides to include in a song, because they become so potent and powerful once he puts them to music, and once again the band comes in and adds all of their sort of more sonic details to it. And yeah, it's just such a unique and stunning piece of music that I think just shows what songwriting at its best can be. It can be this really profound reflection on what it is to be human.
Oh, okay. I never clicked on the actual the kind of family aspect of it. I probably didn't listen to it. I probably haven't listened to it as many times as you have, but to get into that bit, but because I saw piece of references on about that it's to do with relationships with anyone, more or less, in that there's habits and self-destructive habits that could affect friendships that you have and stuff. And as someone who's gone through a couple of friendship groups in the past and stuff, there's some bits of it kind of hit home a bit too much for my liking. I'm liking the for example, the more level they have me, the more I cannot stand me, and that kind of almost describes me in my early 20s, and I don't like it. Whenever you see there's a little thing on Facebook where people someone will put satirical thing on, and there's a box why do you dislike this post, and there's the check box saying this is me and I don't like it. That is exactly me posting that, and I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
But again, yeah.
I have that with a totally different song called Civilian by Wye Oak. That one, I mean, it's always a song that I've loved, but I remember when I was, I just finished uni and I was going through just the full-blown existential crisis that you go through after you graduate. You're like, what the hell? I'm an adult now. Like, nothing makes sense. My life feels so unstable, la, la, la. And there's a line in that song that, I'd known the song for several years, but all of a sudden that line came and like punched me in the chest. And the line is, I still keep my baby teeth in the bedside table with my jewelry. And it's this idea of being trapped between the desires of wanting to hold on to the comfort of childhood versus being an adult and wanting to live your adult life. And I think especially when you're suddenly out of the comfort of, the structure of education and of being like, okay, now I need to go and get a job and pay rent. And, I don't get to live in the comfort of my parents' home anymore and be cared for directly. That is a terrifying feeling when you're not used to it because it's still very novel and new. And that line, I still like that feeling that you're saying where it's like something hits a little too close to home. Especially at a time where it's particularly sore. But then at the same time, I actually personally kind of love that feeling because as cheesy as it sounds, it just reminds us that we're not alone and other people have felt and experienced the things that we have.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. That can make me fall for a song / band / album. Like when you find something and you connect with it on a kind of deeper level. Yeah, something very similar. I think my favourite song of the whole of last decade is a song called Leaving Parties Early by a band called Happy Accidents. And and I remember basically the song about being socially awkward and just in like credit situation stuff, and that described me, again, early 20s, mid-20s, last week, perfectly. And I remember actually trying to say that to the guy who wrote it, saying like, if that song was out 10 years ago, that would be my theme tune. And it's like, yeah, and it's just like you just connect to it and stuff, and just like connect to it. And it's when you have that with music, that's kind of, it just kind of it just clicks, and you just kind of like fall for it, and it's like, okay, yeah, I somehow get this song and stuff. And again, going back to your original point as well, there's like a weird thing with music where you've got kind of a weird relatability, even though you're probably not the demographic of the listener or the demographic of the artist. Quite a lot of my kind of general music listening are from kind of female or non-male identifying vocalists in the LGBTQ community, which as a straight white male is kind of weird. But again, the same band that I referenced earlier have a song from an earlier album, and one of the lyrics is "Four sweaty boys with guitars tell me nothing about my life," and and one of those other lyrics that you suddenly hit and go, oh yeah. But it's kind of weird how kind of music that you wouldn't think you relate to, you find relatable.
Yeah, it's ironic, like that you're saying that, because that's kind of what I was about to say. Is that, I mean, I don't entirely relate to the song "I'll Still Destroy You." And yet it is the song that cemented The National as one of my favorite artists. It's the song that cemented Sleep O Beast as my favorite record of theirs. I mean, the whole record is stunning, but like to feel so invited into someone else's psyche and to so completely like understand their insecurity, and to like there's no, I mean, I won't understand what it's like to be a parent until I become a parent. I will never understand what it's like to be a father because I am a cis straight female. And I am not in my middle age either. Like, because there's also elements of, being middle aged and having a lot of, your past behind you in the song. And I think it was such a novel experience for me to have someone so effectively communicate like their own feeling that I could not relate to it as in I've experienced it, but kind of feel as if I know it because I've been, invited in so intimately. And no artist had ever done that for me at that level. So that song that's why it sticks with me so much. It was the first time that something resonated with me without me actually being able to directly relate to it and yet feel that resonance in such a profound way.
Oh, yeah, no, I completely relate to that feeling as well. So, if we move on to another song, any other songs that you want to?
Yeah, there's one I'm going to touch on briefly. I even literally pulled it up for a minute out of curiosity, to be like, what is this one about again? But weirdly, with this particular song, I'm less inclined to go into what the song means and more just the way the sound of it makes me feel. And it's called The System Only Dreams in Total Darkness. It's at the middle of the record, so I'm actually backing up for a minute. But it just sounds so, like, glitchy. And ironically, it's probably in some ways like one of the less electronic sounds, or less electronic songs, and yet between the name of it and the way that the instrumentation is played out, it feels like it's the most electronic. Like there's this very like angular guitar in it that feels like something glitching. And I used to live in Dallas, and the Dallas skyline at night is full of like just neon. Like a lot of the buildings are like outlined in like multicolored like lights. There's like this globe that's always like got like flashing lights on it. Like it feels like you're in this very like Y2K digital world when you're driving along the highway around it. And I remember this was actually at a time where I think I was living in London. My parents were in Dallas, so actually before I moved to Dallas. And it was my last night there before I was leaving. Me and my mom were driving in the car. Again, we're passing the skyline, and this song is playing. And that just sits with me all the time because it's just, yeah, you just felt like you were in this like weird digital world all of a sudden. And even though like, again, the song is definitely not about this, there's just something about the name of it and something about the sounds of it that is so like evocative in making you feel like you're in some kind of weird digital world. And it's so strange, and I love it.
I think particularly when you have it with the kind of personal story that you just mentioned as well, it's like it almost like soundtrack. It's like become part of your kind of soundtrack. So any kind of like link it to a certain moment in time. So yeah, and again, like you can say it for quite a few of the songs in the album where it feels like one you'd listen to when it's dark, when it's either late, or it's not a. It doesn't feel like it's a daytime album.
It's not. It's definitely not.
Nah, but you can find feel. Let's say when you I think I didn't like relate to kind of like road trips or like driving stuff, but like in my head now I've just got a kind of like a scene from a film where someone's just driving and there's like a city skyline to the side of them, and this is playing and stuff, and yeah, I can kind of see how that kind of could evoke kind of like that feeling and lingering kind of memory and stuff. But it was good. There's like all sorts of different examples in mind as well, like my life that have kind of like that. Like for example, for some reason, Queen's Don't Stop Me Now always reminds me of a certain moment where I was in a bar with a couple of friends singing it really loudly. Alcohol might have been involved, but
Oh, don't.
Yeah.
When I think I did that with Living on a Prayer at a pub in Camden on my birthday once. Me and all my friends, we were hammered. It was late at night. I feel so bad for everyone else in the pub, but at the same time, I'm sure, if it's like past midnight and everybody's like piss drunk, it's a weekend and Living on a Prayer comes on. If you're not singing along to the key change, you shouldn't be there. Like...
Yeah, and then we should just wait for me to do the air guitar solo for that one. But
yeah, oh god. So yeah, I know that feeling well. But actually, it's funny. Like this is maybe one of the songs where I almost don't want to know what it's about because it's the way that it makes me feel is so specific. This is one of the times where I'll talk about a song on the national album because it's also one of my like soundtrack / ouchie that hit a little too close to home songs, and it's called England, and it's on their record High Violet, which is another one. It's one that like I haven't spent much time on, but every time I go back and listen to it I'm like, damn, that's a good album. But what the song is actually about is typical of the National, a breakup, but the lyrics, because of the way they're written, I was able to read them in a completely different way that was like scary accurate to what I was going through at the time. And so I was at a friend of mine's house. It was right around the time that I decided to leave London. And I've talked about this many times on my podcast. Like, I'm very open about it. I was going through really bad depression, and it was at a time where my relationship with living in London had turned toxic. Like, I had fallen out of love with the city that I thought was going to be the place that I was going to spend my life in. You know, like, I was almost at the point where I was like, I will be a green card bride just to stay here. Like, I was there, and then something changed, and all of a sudden I was like, I can't be here anymore. And the song England has, several lines in it that are like, oof. Like, the beginning is, someone send a runner through the weather that I'm under for the feeling that I've lost today. And then later there's a line that says, you must be somewhere in London. You must be loving your life in the rain. You must be somewhere in London walking Abbey Lane. And so it's this sort of like, you must be having this wonderful life in this amazing city, you know, walking Abbey Lane. Ooh, wow. Like, all these kind of interesting things. But actually, I was suddenly deeply sad. Like, there was this disconnect between this life that, you know, other people probably thought they saw, the life that I wanted so desperately in this city. And again, that's not what the song's about at all. But the meaning that it's taken on in my life is so profoundly important to me, and is kind of sat as like a bookmark in my life and in that period of time. So it's funny, like, again, there's part of me that's like beating myself up this morning for not having sat down and reread through all the lyrics and being like, I need to know this album like the back of my hand. But it's talking about this is reminding me that there's value in both the original meaning of the song and the meaning that we all gain from the music that we love.
Yeah.
And The National, for me, are such a great example of both simultaneously.
Yeah, no, I mean, something I'm saying about the concept of kind of like personal soundtracks and how people relate to music and stuff. That's utterly fascinating, and perhaps one of the reasons I quite like doing the podcast is just when you speak to people and how they talk about the relationship that they have with music, and particularly certain songs and stuff. So yeah, that's like quite interesting just to see how you kind of pick apart all sorts of different like different elements of songs and everything. Like, yeah, I mean, again, deviating slightly as well. In 2018, I was on a small group tour of Japan, and I remember at the time I think I was waiting on the one day on the train to Hiroshima, I think from Osaka, I think it was. No, on the train from Kyoto to Hiroshima, and I was waiting for the new Tancred album to like come up, and not realising that spot, even though I was in Japan, midnight in Japan meant that it wasn't going to turn up at midnight. I had to wait until it was midnight in the US before it appeared and stuff. So it was 8 a.m. in the morning when I eventually got it, and that kind of song, that album kind of soundtracked a 2-hour train ride to Hiroshima and stuff. And yeah, whenever I start listening to some of those songs on that album, it just reminds me of the time where I was on my own with a bunch of strangers, 6,000 miles on the other side of the world, and it's just forever linked to that thing there. And I got the chance to actually speak to I think Jess Abbott, who the lead singer from Tancred, and tell her that, and she was like, "Oh wow!" So I got the chance to tell her that. So it was like, but yeah, so it's that kind of. I was just finding when you're talking about how you got different relationships to music and stuff. So whenever any of those songs kick in, it just evokes a feeling. Okay, I was on a train watching mountains pass by, but I was like, part of me was like, yeah, that's when I did some things that I never thought I'd never do and stuff. So
yeah, again, it's the beauty of music. It's that it's so flexible, and ever, just because a song has been finalized and it's out, it still evolves in meaning, in people's individual contexts and the larger context of the world, and sometimes the way that songs take on like a political meaning or whatever. It's kind of beautiful. But there's one last song I definitely want to talk about on this record, because it's, despite the fact that the verses are kind of sad, it's still one of my favorite love songs ever. I kind of have said, like, if I ever marry anyone, this is the song that I would want to dance to. And it's because there's a sentiment at the beginning, at the core of it, that is so, I don't know, it just hits me. And so again, that song is Dark Side of the Gym. And the chorus in it is literally just the line, I'm gonna keep you in love with me for a while. And now, in hindsight, I don't know if that's meant to almost sound toxic or possessive. I surely hope not. But the way that I initially interpreted it, and I'd like to interpret it, is that someone is going to make a point to keep someone in their life for a long time, that they're going to make the necessary effort to make that person feel loved and cared for. And I'm someone in my own personal life that my sort of, I guess, like, love language, the way that I show other people that I care about them, whether that be my family, my friends, a partner, whatever, is specificity, which is kind of showing someone, one, I remember details about your life. I remember the things that you told me, as little as, like, oh, you told me that you had an exam last week. How did it go? But it's also the, knowing the things that make that individual who they are, what makes them a unique person, and making sure that person feels valued for those unique traits, and vice versa. Like, for me, that's how I want to receive love from other people, because, I was bullied as a teenager. I was made to feel like the way that I am wasn't good, that it was annoying or not enough or too much. And so this line in the song, I'm gonna keep you in love with me for a while, this, like, I am going to make an effort because I want you individually in my life, is such a stunning sentiment. And again, when you think about it in contrast to the lyric of the verse, like, they are kind of sad. It's like, the first time I saw you, you're walking out, there was, like, nothing I could say. And I don't know if that's, like, being speechless or, like, a rift or what, but there's so many loving sentiments. And then also, actually, if you watch both the music video and one of the live performances they did, they have just, like, an adorable couple waltzing to the song. Like, it's made to be really just sweet and simple and tender. And yeah, it's just lovely. It is a lovely, lovely, sweet song. And so I couldn't pass it by.
Yeah, I think the chorus itself, I mean, I'm not going to try to disrupt the meaning that you have on it, but there's quite a couple of meanings. Like, again, you said it, hopefully it's not kind of almost toxic, but when you perhaps put it into context and put it to Day I Die, where it's the point where, are we in love anymore, or are we going to be in love anymore, that this could arguably be the prequel to the moment that was talking about that. So the idea being, I'm going to keep you in love for me for a while, for me reads as if someone's going to try and make a contented effort to be in that relationship and to try and work on it, rather than perhaps do the kind of quote-unquote typical stagnant marriage thing, like the stereotype of the marriage where, like, there's, like, they're just two people in a house who at one time loved each other enough to make it legal that there was in a marriage and stuff. Whereas here it seems like it's a concerted effort to go beyond that and trying to keep that kind of relationship or that love that's between the person anyway. But again, a lot of this is from the one viewpoint. You never really see the other side of the conversation, so it's quite insular, so you don't really know what the other side of the conversation is happening and stuff. But no, I kind of agree. I quite like it's a good sentiment, and it's an interesting chorus as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the kind of reads that we both get from it are very much related in a sense. And also, like, some of the things that you've talked about and kind of refreshed me on about, like, it just being two people who are in a long-term relationship, who have children, who have settled down, all that. Like, I kind of knew that about this record, but what I'm enjoying about this conversation is it's, like, really reminding me, like, how important that is to this album. And I think that it also just shows the beauty of seeing, like, no matter how flawed a relationship is or a marriage is, because it will be flawed. We're human beings. And, you know, the typical like early magic of falling in love with someone dies down over time, and that's normal. But I think what I'm realizing through this conversation once again is the value of accepting a relationship for the entirety of what it is, and still, as you said, wanting to continue to make an effort to maintain it and keep it. And, you know, it's like, even if you think about the title of the album, Sleep Well Beast, like it's got this almost like weird dichotomy in it. Like sleep well is kind of tender. It's almost childlike. Like it almost sounds like it should be the title of like a children's book. And obviously beast is something that's ugly and flawed. And I don't know. It's like, it's almost like it's holding that exact like tenderness and acceptance towards something that isn't going to be perfect. And maybe it's even like a little deprecating in a like playful way. It's like, you know, you're a beast, but you're my beast, or whatever, in a very non-weird way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've read that the quote-unquote beast of the album is the kind of figurative name for issues in this marriage that this album's about. That so like the troubles and the issues that like perhaps like two people in a relationship at that time in that age will probably start to see as well. So like there's all the difficulties that can have when you're in kind of like a marriage or in a relationship or long-term relationship. And I think beast is I think beast might be the collective name to cover that. And whether the sleep well bit is either supposed to suggest the eventual
like
coming
placate
over
it, maybe?
or so like I don't know if I'm going to phrase this well, but basically I don't mean in my head I want to say euthanize the beast, but I don't know if that's the right words or the right language to use, where it's like death with dignity, I think, where like you're kind of putting something to sleep, like you're putting this beast to sleep, but it's not an inhumane death, it's the closest to humane or assist that you can be. And rather than tackle and try and kill the quote-unquote beast immediately, like so there's not, so you can't, like in mythology, like the heroes don't just stab the beast and it goes and all the issues are away. You can't just remove problems such as that. You have to kind of tackle them and eventually ease them down, put them to rest, and then slowly, like, again, I can't think of a better word than euthanize, but
I know what you mean, though,
yeah.
and I think it's a really good read on it. Either way, I think, you know, both the common point in both of our interpretations of the record is, again, that love, especially long-term relationships, are flawed, they're imperfect, but there's a certain tenderness and beauty that comes with it, regardless of its flaws, or not even like in spite of, but maybe even in some ways in part thanks to. You know, it's just a beautiful, overall as an album, like a beautiful tapestry of what it means to be in a long-term relationship in its actual sense. It's not a sappy love story that's full of like everything is perfect and I'm a princess and it's very like, no, love is full of moments of pain, of monotony, of quiet beauty, of more significant loud emotion, of existential questions. It's all of it at the same time, and all, I guess, encompassed in a little home full of intimate moments, if you will. Yeah,
and I think that's a nice place to kind of end the talk about the thing. So it's a nice place to move on. So we're going to briefly talk about the reception and the performance of the album. And I couldn't really find much in terms of performance apart from the UK, where it went silver, and so which means it's sold over 60,000. And in terms of its chart places, it reached number 1 in Canada, Croatia, Ireland, Portugal, Scotland, the UK. I didn't realise he's got to number 1 in the UK. But again, I think the last couple of years, I think because of how music has changed and how we consume music and how the measurements have changed, I blew my mind that the Wombats got a number 1 album the previous week of recording. Band Yard Act were pretty much nearly at number 1.
I love Yard Act.
Yeah,
I love Yard. And actually, we work with them at my job. We're really, really happy working with them. We're super excited about just how well they're doing. They're a phenomenal group.
Yeah, I think the only thing that stopped them was that they were against what's his name? Ollie. Is it Ollie Alexander? The guy from Years and Years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, boy, he's got stuff out right now. Okay.
Yeah, he was basically between him and Yard Act. And I think there's a great Facebook post that Yard Act put where they said that basically Ollie Alexander had to go onto Lorraine and get people to buy the album, I think, to get to number 1. But
they need to counter it by getting their boy Elton John to vouch for them, because Elton's a fan of Yard Act. We've been talking about that a lot in the office, and shared it on our socials. Yeah, which is also really cool. And hats off to Elton for being so intrigued and excited about listening to so much different music. But yeah, as far as like kind of that like I guess left field punk coming out of the UK, Yard Act are like a really cool contender. Definitely making me think of like Shame after their second record, which is very much the world of punk that I kind of like to be in. I like punk that's a little bit weird. Like them and Squid are another group that I really, really love.
I've not heard of Squid. I'll have to
highly recommend.
Yeah.
I was okay with their new record, but over the years they've had some really like incredible singles, and it's just weird punk music.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, I think because I was gonna go to the DIY show in Birmingham with Yard Act, but that got postponed, and it's now in September. It was supposed to be on the 8th of January. Yeah, so which is slightly annoying, so I'm quite looking forward to seeing them live. It does mean that I'd probably get more time to actually listen to the album though, because I think because if they would have played, it would have been before the album. But I've only listened to the album a couple of times so far, but really enjoyed it. It was good to listen to on the way to work. I'll say that anyway. But in terms of the critical stuff and critical response to the album, now I don't know what it's been like in terms of comparing it to the other albums, but there's been a lot of praise for this album by stuff. I'm looking at Metacritic now. The AV Club gave it 100. Well, it's 100 on Metacritic. I think I don't know, that's an A, isn't it, on AV Club or something. Independent got 100 on that. Other things, 405 gave it 85. Consequence 83. The Observer gave it 80. Journey Sound 80. I think Pitchfork. I really
want to see what they gave it. I'm gonna look it up too.
Yeah, as always, the Pitchfork review is always interesting. And again, it is like a dictionary of words with more than 3 syllables. And again, like the summary on Metacritic was saying that they don't reinvent the band's image so much as carefully muss its hair a bit, unfasten one more button on its shirt collar. They are still a good dinner party band, but now they've made the album for when the wine starts spilling on the rug. The tablecloth is rumpled, the music has imperceptibly gotten louder, and all those friendly conversations have turned on a little too heated.
That I like some of that, and also I double checked something because I was curious. I was nearly 100% sure that Trouble Will Find Me would have had a higher score, and it did. So Trouble Will Find Me got an 8.4 on Pitchfork, which put it in the best new music category, and Sleep Well Beast scored an 8. And again, I actually like Sleep Well Beast better, but maybe that's because I've spent more of an like intimate amount of time and concentration on it, and also because I used to hear it a lot I used to hear Trouble Will Find Me a lot as a teenager, so maybe that's kind of warped my view of it when it's like overplayed in the store you're working at or on the radio. As much as I do love that album, it's kind of, and also it's just like, it's like, ooh, that's the trendy cool album. That was the if there was one album that you would have shared on Tumblr from the National, it was that one. So yeah, maybe I'm biased, but yeah, I'm glad to hear it got even more praise than I initially thought it did. But and like blast, like no beef to the Grammys, but I kind of take people winning Grammys with a grain of salt.
There's a podcast called Name 3 Songs that have just done.
I know Name 3 Songs. Sarah, who runs it, is an old friend.
Ah, okay.
We also know each other. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm actually follow them on Patreon as well. But yeah, they've just released the episode on the Grammys that I was listening to earlier, and so because I think they got a Grammy expert or someone on there to talk about just how perhaps not. Yeah, I've always got issues with award shows anyway, but yeah, particularly the Grammys and how weird and how touched they seem to be and stuff. But anyone listening who's not. I've mentioned Name 3 Songs quite a few times. Definitely listen to that. This world is ever getting smaller.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes me laugh too. Actually, no, I admittedly really need to catch up on Name 3 Songs, but it's been cool to see. I mean, I follow them on Instagram, and I've definitely been like, oh, that looks like such a good episode, and then never get around to listening to it. But they have such a cool angle, and I think it's been great to see, like, you know, people really talking about, like, you know, like, why do we shame, like, fangirls so much? Or why is it, like, through toxic masculinity? I saw they did a recent episode about, like, Harry Stylenson and, you know, like, all this stuff that, you know, is often looked at least over the last several years, just been, like, you know, stupid gossip and, like, the type of stuff you see in teen magazines. They're like, no, actually, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to, you know, not make it such a stupid and trivial thing. And they have a point. Like, it really, even just reading, like, the headlines on their Instagram always, you know, makes me realize, like, oh, I need to think about whatever this topic is a little bit differently, you know?
But yeah, I think if you definitely check out the Grammy one at least. Anyway, it's
I will.
Good, quite an interesting chat as well. So yeah, getting to near the end of our conversation. So, have you ever seen the National live?
I have. I think only once. I'd definitely love to see them more. But yeah, I got to take my mom to a festival in Austin, Texas called ACL, and they were playing. She's also, through me, become a fan of the National, which was great. Yeah, it was 8 million degrees because it's Texas, and my mom probably wanted to kill me that I was like dragging her through a field for a day, but in the insane heat. But that was a phenomenal set to watch. They're a very, very, very good live act.
Yeah, I can probably get that these carry quite well, particularly in larger sounds and stuff. I mean, when I first listened, I'm like, will this carry off in arenas? But then again, though, I think it's probably one of those bands that unless you kind of see it live, it's the one of those bands that you probably experience, like you can't explain why it's different live, but it's somehow good live. I can get that impression from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think anyone whose music is like has that sort of like sonically expansive feeling can usually put on a good live show because it just feels like it's filling whatever space you're in. Like, I remember seeing the XX headline a festival a few years back, and that was great because, again, a lot of their music has that very, like, expansive feeling. And when it's, like, dark outside and the speakers are almost, like, making the music, like, waft over the field, it's like you're just being blanketed in it. And the Nationals music has that quality, too. So it's a great live show.
Yeah. Okay. So, when was that? Sorry, that was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was, I think, 2018.
So I'm assuming there's a lot of songs from this album that was played then, so it was probably touring.
Yep, that they were playing a lot from that album. Did they play? Yeah, I don't think they played "I'll Still Destroy You." I don't think it's usually on their live set, which really bugs me because I want to see that, hear that song played live so bad. But yeah, it was a very good show, very, very good.
Oh, cool. So, and if people have listened to this for the first time and want to go and perhaps listen to other albums from the National, where would you recommend they go next?
I mean, there's definitely the trifecta I mentioned. So High Violet, Trouble Will Find Me, and Sleep Will Beast are 3 very, 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 very good albums. I probably, just for the sake of novelty, will suggest High Violet a little bit over Trouble Will Find Me, but there's some really great, like really, really beautiful songs on Trouble Will Find Me as well. So you know what? Go with the trifecta. Go with those three, and you'll be really happy.
Okay. And now we're here to the most important question of the podcast, which is the song for the playlist. The Hall of Fame playlist on Spotify. Whether it remains on Spotify after the last few days, I have no idea. That's an internal debate I'm having in my head. But so what this is, for people who have not listened to us before, is that I'm going to ask Sophia to pick one song from this album to be immortalised forever on this Hall of Fame playlist. I can't veto it. Whatever she says goes. And which song are you going to pick?
So, as I said earlier, I was very stuck between two, but I think the more I've spoken about it, I've made my decision. So I am going to go with I'll Still Destroy You.
So yes, I Will Still Destroy You. It goes on to the ever-growing list, following the death metal Otherworld song from the Final Fantasy X soundtrack, and then before that, Scatman. So that's going to be that's a interesting mix.
Weird pivot.
Yeah,
particularly from Scatman. Okay, well, hey.
So that's going to be added onto that, and we've now definitely reached the end of the conversation. And I was going to say I've absolutely enjoyed the conversation that we've had. I found it quite fascinating and all sorts of stuff as well. If people want to find you and listen to your own podcast, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me in a few places. So I just, out of convenience, often direct people to Instagram. My Instagram is Sounds Like Sophia, which is spelled Sofia, not PH. And then my podcast, Before the Chorus, is at Before the Chorus Podcast. It is on Spotify. I probably will end up staying on Spotify because honestly, you can't beat them all. I'm sure Apple Music and Tidal have their own dirt too, in addition. As much as I have no time for Joe Rogan, but anyway,
agreed.
Less than zero time for that man. But anyway, I am on Spotify. I'm also on Apple. I'm on Amazon Podcasts as well. I'm on Ghana, which is a streaming platform in India as well. So wherever you are in the world, please feel free to listen. I'd love to have you there. It's a deep dive interview podcast. We just talked about kind of our interpretations of albums. What I do is I sit down with the artists who wrote the albums and we talk about their reasoning and their stories and their meaning behind a record. And I've interviewed Glass Animals, Japanese Breakfast. So when this comes out, I will have recently put out an episode with Palace. Actually, the one with Palace is actually going to be almost a month old by that point, but it's a phenomenal episode. I really, really... And not to my own credit, but to Leo, the frontman of Palace, he had some really wonderful things to say, really profound stuff. So, yeah, check it out.
Yeah, no, I really quite enjoyed it, particularly because I think particularly how you kind of speak to the musicians about music and what their thing is. It's kind of like what I seem to get out of what I kind of listen to when talking about music as well. So you kind of get into those deep dives about the reasoning of why they write it and stuff, and it's always quite fascinating. You've interviewed Rebecca Taylor from Self-Esteem twice.
Yes, and she is a gem.
Yeah, and I think on previous podcasts knows that I'm a massive fan of Slow Club, and that first album I've still not listened. I've not been able. I was putting off Prioritise Pleasure, and I've not listened to it yet, and I've just realised that, and to a point where I realised, crap, I've not listened to it, and it's missed what might be on my top albums of last year. But I keep meaning to go into this because I started listening to a couple of singles, and I've no idea why I've slept on it for so long. But that first album's great, and
Compliments Please is a really solid solo debut. Prioritize Pleasure is leaps and bounds better than that. So if we're already starting from a good place, and it's just like I was so just impressed by Rebecca, and yeah, she's a gem. She's like, I'll say she's become like friend of the pod, just through the fact that she's been on twice. It kind of feels like she's been part of the growth of the podcast just simply by being both episode 3 and episode 29 or 30 or something. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, but to say, again, if anyone's not listened to it, I'd definitely recommend it. I mean, say you've got a couple of people that you've got on there, say Glass Animals, who are doing pretty well at the moment.
They're doing okay.
Yeah.
They're doing fine.
Yeah.
They just recently reached number 1 on the Billboard chart for Heat Waves, which has been on the chart for like 81 weeks. Like the album's like getting close to being 2 years old, and yet it's still going strong. So good for them, honestly. I'm very, very happy for them.
Yeah, and I really quite liked the interview that you did with Sloppy Jane as well, because I never listened to the music before so I gave the album a listen after that interview and stuff, and I'm quite enjoying the album and stuff as well. So she's real cool. Yeah, and I can't recommend Before the Chorus enough, and I'm glad that someone with your experience in terms of radio hosting and podcast hosting has took a punt on a hobbyist like myself. So I'm happy that you've come on here. So it's glad to have you on.
It has been such a pleasure, and it's definitely helped me to get to know and enjoy an album that I already love very much even more. So yeah, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This podcast network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/WeMadeThis. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
Hello everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you've just listened to, or maybe you're just about to listen to. We're not going anywhere, but we'd love to keep the lights on for even longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and, well, you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. Just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This. And get the ball rolling. Now, back to your scheduled programme. Elsewhere on We Made This. We dig music.
I got given a set of mindfulness cards as a Christmas present.
Okay.
And it's a load of fucking bollocks, it really is.
Is it like, with them being cards, I've got them, like, this image of them being like Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies, but with, like, go and read a book or something like that.
Yeah, pretty much. But so there are these cards, you read them one a day and you're meant to do the tasks. And the task on one day was...
Listen to Bruce Springsteen.
Go and listen to a piece of music that you haven't heard before and listen to it without any prejudice, regardless of genre. And I'm like, have you met me? That isn't possible.
I do that every day anyway.
So I went and listened to something I hadn't heard before and didn't know what genre it was going to be because it was from a set of polls on Twitter. And I listened to this song. It was about someone and obsessive thoughts and worrying they were going to start cutting themselves. And I'm thinking, well, this isn't very mindful.
The TARDIS crew.
I do love pirates, but they just never gel for me, like all the pirate episodes on TV, and even the audios and the books. There's only been one pirate story in Doctor Who, which I've actually liked, and I did really enjoy that one. Except that wasn't really actual pirates, it was Badger pirates in space, but it was still piratey.
Badger pirates in space?
Yes, but I am willing to make an exception for pirates this episode, because Sea Devils.
Red and buried.
I felt safe when I was there the entire time.
Because you were the one killing people.
Yes, I was the British serial killer in Singapore.
What a plot twist. What a scoop that would be.
Imagine, we'd go viral.
His body was found in a graveyard.
Wow, that's up your alley, isn't it?
Right, yeah, as you see, now that out of context, people that don't know me, I just enjoy a graveyard. I think everyone enjoys a graveyard to a certain extent.
No.
No? Okay. I'm probably butchering those pronunciations, but I'm not going to apologise because they're murderers. So I think you lose the right. Yeah, you lose the right of good pronunciation when you kill people. Fair. But I will say, not victim blaming at all, but if on your first date someone wants to meet in a graveyard.
Yeah, that's an alarm bell.
I mean, as someone that loves graveyards, part of me would go, actually, that sounds quite nice. But I would just maybe take a friend.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.